All right, so welcome back. In this section of the tutorial, we are going to take the liquid that's in the middle of this cup, and we are going to make water and wine and look at a couple of the other settings. And really, we're just sort of tweaking things and trying to make things look accurate. So to start with, I'm going to go ahead and delete the material off my wine right now. So it should just be a gray solid like it is in your scene. I'm going to stop the render view for a second, just so I can move these things around without too much problem. All right, so I've got this water. Now, one of the things that I would like you to do, I want you to note that in my hierarchy here, I have my wine glass in a subdivision surface, but I do not have the wine in a subdivision surface. And I'm going to set this back to the way it was set before. Right, and so the way it is set before, and if I render this now, we should be able to see it pretty quickly. It's actually pretty clean looking as it stands, but that's all right. But in certain views, you can see faceting with the default settings here. And so, and the reason I didn't use a subdivision surface is because that subdivision surface rounds everything, right? Now, I could add more subdivisions, but I could select this edge or, try and harden this edge, but that's going to harden all the points along the edge too. In this case, it's just easiest to say, let's make this 48 subdivisions. If we just increase the number of subdivisions here for this rotation, it's going to be that much cleaner when we go. And that's important because with materials, with transparent materials and getting them to look right in a scene, one of the key things that you need to do is you need to make sure that the two materials intersect slightly. So if I was, or the two objects intersect slightly, right? The liquid and the glass, right? Because this is just, basically I copied the spline, deleted a bunch of stuff. So I just had the edges that I needed. If we go to our standard layout real quick, and actually let's go back to Redshift. I want to make sure, yeah, that is off, great. Okay, so go back to standard. If I change this so I can see all four views, and I select my wine, and I want to go to model mode, and hopefully I can see it here. It's highlighted in orange. I don't see it in the side view so much, but you can kind of see it here. If I have this selected and I go into solo view, oh, I was totally on the wrong one in the side view. That's why I couldn't see it. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, hit S, and select this and hit S. I just want to show you a little bit with how I made this. So you can see, right, the spline comes up. It basically maps the inside dimensions of the cup. But then I also want you to know I did account for surface tension, right? So this rises up because liquids tend to, right, want to stretch between two surfaces with adhesion. And then it slopes down into the middle of the cup, right? So it's like a gentle cupping on the top surface. And the reason this points here is because wine cups tend to have a little divot at the bottom of the cup. So if I was to go ahead and turn that off, now you can see, if we look at this, these two things are intersecting. And you'll see this is the inside edge of the cup here, but then the liquid goes beyond that. It actually goes into the cup. And the reason that I did that is because if these two surfaces don't match perfectly, that means that Cinema 4D understands there to be an air gap between them. And if we're transitioning, right, if you remember physics, if you think back to physics, if you've never had physics, it doesn't matter. But light, when it transitions between mediums, so like if it goes from water to air to water again, or glass to air to water, right, there is going to be reflections that happen because anytime light goes through a surface, index of refraction, all the math involved in that with different angles and sines and cosines and stuff, right? All of that basically says that some of the light's going to go through and bend a little bit, and some of the light is going to bounce off. And so the issue is the light bouncing off that interface between the two and then bouncing off again when it goes through the surface again. And that causes really weird artifacts. You will know you have them when you see strange geometric shapes kind of form on the sides of the glass. So if you have these two things intersecting, then Cinema understands it as the transmission should go from air to glass to water, not air, glass, air, water. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So you need that to be intersecting. So, okay, so let's go back to our Redshift view so we can actually do some material making. All right, so the first thing we're going to do in this case is we're just going to copy our wine material because it's already, or our glass material because it's already pretty close to water. So I'm going to go ahead and select it in my material manager. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste. And I've got this second material 3 here. So I'm going to rename this one water 2, just because I've already got a water in here because I didn't want to delete all those materials as I was working. And so what I'm going to do with water 2 is I have it selected, and because I want all of this open, I'm just going to go ahead, and I don't care about this view that much. I'm going to double click on here. We're not going to be doing any node editing right at this moment, but I can just scoot this over and actually have this up and see all of this without pulling this thing back over. So all I need to do at this point is make a couple minor changes to turn this into water from glass. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my transmission, right? It looks like this is white, but remember it's only like 5%, whatever. I need to make this totally white. And I'm going to leave depth on there, but we don't have any scatter color. And I'm leaving the dispersion at 10 right now, although we'll see that that may not necessarily be best. Okay, so I've got all of that set. So now I've got this set. The other thing I need to do is I need to adjust the index of refraction. If you're making a transparent material and you don't know what the index of refraction is, you can just say index of refraction of water, and they're going to tell you it's 1.333. Now, something to note is that this is essentially, it's not really an average, but it's sort of measured in the middle of the light spectrum, right? So if we look at this beautiful chart that I have up here, this is the refractive index of water. Now, the way that, right, IOR, or refractive index, works is that somewhere around here-ish is where they actually make the measurement. It's like 680 nanometers is like the standard wavelength that they measure this at. I don't know why. These are things I'm learning as I go. But that's where the measurement is made. And so you'll get one value, but it really means the value here. Now, what you're going to see is that each wavelength of light, as we go from red to purple or violet, is it has a slightly different index of refraction, right? And that's what that dispersion value does, is it basically says, how wide should this range be? Right? Should it be a narrow range or a wide range? And it's actually kind of inverted. The smaller numbers on the scale in cinema mean a wider range of diffraction, and the bigger numbers mean a narrower range of dispersion. Right? And dispersion is basically just a measure of the amount of variance between, red and violet in terms of how this bends, right? And that's where we get chromatic aberration. We get like the color spectrum separating. We get rainbows, right? All of this, prisms, that's how that all works. So you can always search for a material and see what that index of refraction is. So we can go back up to reflection, go to our IOR, and set this to 1.333. And as soon as I do that, I want you to note what happens to the preview here. If I go and pull this down a touch, you'll see, and if I zoom in, maybe here it'll make it easier, right? You'll see that it's magnifying the background a different amount based on the index of refraction. This is the 1.5 and this is 1.33. So we've basically got water. I'm going to leave the dispersion at 10 currently, and we'll see what this looks like. So I'm going to go ahead, and now what I'd like to do is drop this material on here. So there's two ways I can do that. I could either just drag it over and drop it on my wine object here, or if I have the wine object selected, I can use the solo mode so that I can see this and then drag and drop this, right? Because if I was trying to drag and drop it, I would actually turn the glass into water. Okay, so I've got my water on there. Let's go ahead and render this and see what we get. So it looks pretty watery. Now, one of the things is I was looking for the dispersion value of water, and there's not really a good table at all based on this. And so the way that you would test and see how this works, and you can tell maybe we need to do something with, like, that's getting like way too green. Maybe that needs to be dialed in, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. And that's really it's probably catching and magnifying the foot of the glass right now. And it may be, the other thing is it may be that this, if I set this depth to 0, let's see if that makes any change there. It does not. So, right, and we don't really need any depth on this unless the water is murky or has something in it, a dye or something in there. We don't need to have any depth at all for water. So although we could, if it was like an ocean or something, we might want this to be tinted slightly blue or some slight tone to make it, to make that actually change. Anyway, so so I don't know if this is accurate. 10 is probably not. Typically as the index of refraction increases, there is a decrease in the dispersion. So that means that the index of refraction for diamonds is pretty high, and the dispersion for diamonds is 70 on this, which would, is inverted, so it would be tighter than the dispersion of glass, which is set to 10, which is broader. Now, so does that mean that water should be lower in dispersion? Does it actually spread light more? And you can kind of see the rainbow starting to happen here, right? We've got our blues here on this edge, and then we got these nice warm tones here and some yellowness as well. I honestly don't know. My suggestion would be that you fill up a wine glass with water, you shoot a pretty white light through it, and you look and see, does this look accurate from a similar angle with a similar amount of water to this? And I don't have a glass of water that I can test this with right now. And so I would just go ahead and tweak this until it matched. And I assume that water that is hard or has more minerals in it, and water that has less minerals in it probably has a different dispersion and may even have a slightly different index of refraction. Okay, so we've made water. Let's go ahead and turn this water into wine. So turning the water into wine is not super challenging. All we're going to be doing really is adjusting the color of our transmission. And we might potentially we're going to want to add some depth and some scatter color as well. So to start with, we want wine, and we're going to do red wine. We're not doing white. Wine tends to be somewhere in the purplish range. And if I click on here, you'll see that might be, a little bit too blue, not warm enough, and also, pretty intense. So I'm going to pull this slider towards red a little bit more and just go a little bit further over. And you can kind of see that this is now looking more like a red wine, It still looks pretty thin. And what I may need to do is actually get this color a little bit paler. for when I start to do the next steps. Now, I actually would prefer this to be a little bit more in the purple zone or in the red zone. It's really hard to choose. I'm actually really happy with whatever this is, right? 128, 31, 84 seems to be just about right. Okay, and note, right, we are getting that color through there. So let's go ahead and adjust our depth some. Now, right, we don't, wine is definitely more, has more, it's more particulate, right? Light doesn't make it through as well as it does for water or for anything else. So right now there's no depth. Let's go ahead, and if I just boost this up a tiny bit, this should get really, really dark, right? We don't want this to be quite that dark. We probably want it to be less than 1. If I go to 1, you'll see, and this is something, just as a heads up, I've noticed, is that occasionally things get messed up here when I make these changes. So if I refresh this or stop this, sometimes I can get that that color to go back. Maybe I just need to rotate my view some. I'm just going to move the camera a little bit here. So this is a little bit of a bug that I'm not sure if there's a setting we can adjust to make this go away. But I want you to note that right now, this reflection is not fully visible through the glass. And I think that that's actually, I don't know if it's just because it's warping it and it's hiding down here, or if it is, if it's a bug in the software where it's not actually drawing through there. And there may be a setting to change that, but I honestly don't know what it is, and I'll have to research that. Okay. So the other thing is, with wine, we're not going to worry about dispersion at all. I'm going to set this to 0. Because the wine is going to be dark enough and deep enough that we really don't need to worry about whether light is, how light bends through it. Just that we need to go in here and say, okay, so what else do we need to do? Well, let's go ahead and increase our, the depth is set to 3 right now. I thought I set it to 1. Let's go ahead and put this back to 1. 3 is a little light. I might want to go a little bit lighter, more than 1, maybe. We can try 1.2. And again, this is going to depend on the wine you are attempting to model, right? There are lighter weight red wines that are much thinner and transmit light more and are, tend to be a lighter color as well. But then there's things like Merlots and Cabernets and other wines like that that are definitely significantly darker and thicker and more syrupy, right? And so you can see with the depth and everything, I do get a pretty accurate representation of this wine. We could have some backscatter or forward scatter with this anisotropy. We could, put this, we could have a scatter color that's somewhere in the same range as this pink. Again, we could always, work with this, bring this level up a little bit, or, pull over here to lighten that wine up in terms of, density. There's a lot of different, parameters we could adjust, but I just want to get you to a point where you can kind of get, a basic wine down. So let's go ahead and zoom this view out just a touch. Now, initially I had made 2 cups so we could have wine in one and no wine in the other. But I think we're in a good spot right now. This. Now, one thing there's one other thing I want to show you, because it doesn't really matter for this example, right? We're not really going to make this have a bunch of cloudiness in it or anything. But as you go forward, I would like you to experiment with your, I'm probably would increase the depth on the glass material real quick. Right, because it's kind of a little bit too, not quite where I wanted. I should probably set this to, let's make this point, I'm going to do 0.8 and see if that like cleans up some of that green a little bit. Yeah, it could go a little further. And it may also be, no, that's probably just it. It probably just needs to be cleaned up just a little bit more. But, okay. So, what I was going to say is on my water 2, which I don't know why it's so dark, but it is. Okay. It's actually a gorgeous color. So one of the other things that maybe you would want to do is be like, oh, how, like I'd like to be able to do, maybe add some noise to one of the values for the transmission property, but I don't know, but there's no connectors here. How do I get that? How do I get those accessible so I can actually connect a node to one of these settings, like whether it's color or maybe depth might be another interesting one to do. So to do that, what you do is you right click on the node and you'll see there's this add input option. So this is where all of the other inputs are. If you click all, it's going to be all of them, and then this node is going to be huge. We don't want to do that. But if we go down to, and we don't even want the advanced transmission, although maybe there's a setting that in there that allows us to go through the shadow, but we're not going to worry about that right now. But if I go down to base properties, transmission, and let's just start with color. So I'm going to go ahead and choose color, and then I'm going to do, I'm going to add an input for, what's it called as well, for depth as well. Okay, so I've got these two set. So if I wanted, right, to do noise on the color channel, right, I can just go ahead and double click. Over here I can say max, type in max on, and max on noise comes up. Double click on that. And just go down and connect this to the color channel for transmission. And I'm going to have a very, you can kind of see the noise in the surface there, right? It's going to be a very different experience. To start with, I'm going to set my my depth to 0, just so we can kind of see. And you can see that this is going through, and I've got very noisy water or wine or whatever. And there's some other weird artifacts happening too, right? And so if I go ahead and select my noise, let's say I actually want this to be, to look a little bit different. First, to show us, so we can see better what we're doing, we're going to take the overall scale, and I'm going to set this to 20, because that should make the noise much more obvious in the fluid. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take one of these and not make it black. I'm going to say, let's go ahead and just make these wine colored again. So the deeper tone's going to be like, say, this purple. And then the warmer tone, we can go ahead and say is going to be a much lighter pink. Okay, and so there are, something's going on in my render right now, and that's fine. I'm not too worried about it. There's probably a shadow or something there. This will probably look a little bit better over here. It may be a reflection from the glass, or like the glass transmitting, right? But you can see now I've got this liquid with varying colors throughout. Like I've got noise in that liquid, which can be really useful in certain settings. Now let's say if instead of doing this, what I'd like to do is connect this to my depth, right? Suddenly my image goes black. Even though these are not 0 values, it's really, really dark. The reason for that is even though we have many different systems for measuring red, green, and blue, or our different color information. In the end, the way that the GPU and the way that this is all processed is it sees these values as existing as, three sets of values from 0 to 1, right? And if you remember, if we go to our base object, I'm going to go at our standard material node. I'm going to disconnect this, right? If we do that, then you'll notice, right, our depth, 0 means like nothing. So that's going to be problematic if it goes to 0. But then on the other end, right, even a 1 is going to be pretty dark, right? So everything we were doing was somewhere in between these two values, and that's not really going to work out for us, right? We want to be able to get above 0. And so the way we can do that is we need a node that's going to take the range of values from 0 to 1 from this and convert it to another range of values. And so you'd think I'd want to use color, but color is problematic. They do have one for color, but it basically just remaps it to another range of values that's acceptable for color. So you can take like a narrower range of colors and expand it to a larger range, but you still get from 0 to 1 as your maximum. You can't really go beyond that. So what we need to do is we need to go to math. Is that where it is? And go to float. And then under float, we can go to change range and double click. And so we can take this color as our input. And then we don't really need any of the other inputs right now, because what we can do is, this is the old range, minimum and maximum. And you'll note that this has made it black and white, this transition. I am going to go ahead and actually make this black and white again, so that we can, so that we have that full range of values and we can kind of see what's happening in this example. And so then I can say, here's my new range. And so I can set this from 0 to whatever. So in our case, or in my case, I'm going to set this to, we'll set it to 10. It's going to be a huge variation and probably far too much variation. But so now I'm going to go ahead and take this and drop this into our depth channel. And you'll see that now, right, I have, right, a uniform color, right? I took it off the color here. But I have variations in depth, right? So you could say, oh, maybe this is a liquid where there are areas where there's more density of particles. Like it doesn't really necessarily make sense with the noise that I've got here, the way I've got it set up. But if this was layered, if there was like a film of deposits or something here down at the bottom that had like separated out of the fluid, that might be a good use of something like this. But I really just wanted to show you, like, sometimes you need bigger ranges of numbers. And so you can still use this noise or something to get those numbers. You just have to, right, change the range in order to make it something that would work for the values you're trying to accomplish. Okay, and that is it for this tutorial. Thank you for joining me.